In a world where everything is getting more expensive, most people think the problem is money. But the real problem is something deeper. This is not just inflation. This is a shift in how we live. You don't need to study economics to know something is wrong. You feel it the moment you stand at the checkout counter, when your grocery bill is higher than it used to be, when your electricity bill quietly increases month after month, when your rent is due and your salary disappears within days. Inflation is not a line on a chart. It's a silent force, slowly pulling down the standard of living for millions of people. And the most unsettling part is, no one really knows where it will stop. Rising living costs don't just make people poorer, they make people tired. You work more, but feel like you have less. You try to save, but nothing stays. You cut back, but expenses keep moving ahead of you. Meanwhile, income grows slowly. Sometimes not at all. The gap between what you earn and what it costs to live keeps getting wider. And inside that gap, something begins to wear people down. Their energy, their mental health, and eventually, their future. But the real question isn't just why everything is getting more expensive. The real question is, what does this say about the world we live in? When basic necessities become a burden, it's no longer just an economic issue. It's a signal that something deeper inside the system is under pressure. Inflation doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the structure of the economy, from debt, from policy decisions, from years of maintaining a lifestyle that may no longer be sustainable. In this video, we're going to break down the true roots of the global cost of living crisis, why money is losing value faster than people can earn it, and more importantly, how individuals can protect themselves in a world that is becoming more expensive every single day. Because at some point, the cost of living stops being just a number and becomes a fight. Rising living costs are not just about things getting more expensive. They are a sign of something deeper shifting beneath the surface. Pressures that have been building for decades. Cycles that societies tried to delay, but could never avoid. Behind every price increase, every unexpected bill, every expense that goes beyond what you planned, there is a long story. A global economy that has operated for too long on stimulus, borrowing, and consumption beyond its limits. For years, growth was fueled by cheap money. Governments borrowed easily. Businesses expanded using leverage. People spent based on credit. Everything was built on one assumption, that the future would always be better than the past. But when inflation returns, that assumption turns into a burden. Energy prices rise. Transportation costs rise. Raw materials, healthcare, education, everything starts moving up at the same time. And because these are the foundations of daily life, workers are the first to feel the impact. Modern life is built on interconnected costs. And when one part increases, everything else reacts. When fuel prices go up, transportation becomes more expensive. That raises the cost of goods, which raises the cost of food, which eventually affects electricity and basic services. A small shock at the top of the system becomes a heavy burden at the bottom. And workers are always at the end of that chain. They don't control supply chains. They don't set prices. But they are the ones who pay for every disruption. But what makes this even harder is not just that prices are rising. It's that they are rising faster than income can adapt. Salaries adjust slowly, quarterly, yearly, sometimes never. But prices adjust constantly, weekly, even daily. And in between those two speeds, workers get trapped. They are not poor in the traditional sense, but they are becoming poor in a modern way. Poor in access, poor in savings, poor in choices. a new question begins to appear in their lives. How do you maintain your standard of living when costs keep rising, but your income does not? So they start cutting back, dining out, coffee, travel, small moments of rest that once helped them recover from long working days. And when essential costs go up, the first thing that disappears is quality of life. And that's when a society starts losing its balance. People begin to feel like they are working harder just to stay in the same place. They work longer hours just to maintain what used to be normal. They spend less, but still feel stretched. Life starts to feel like a rubber band being pulled closer and closer to its limit. Month after month, with nothing saved, people begin to lose something more important than money. They lose belief in the future, and that loss of belief is more dangerous than inflation itself. Because when people stop believing that tomorrow will be better than today, they stop investing in themselves. They stop learning. They stop growing. They stop trying to move forward. In that way, rising living costs don't just affect money. They slowly make a society poorer, not only financially, but mentally. People shift into survival mode. They focus on getting through the month instead of building the future. And when millions of people do this at the same time, an economy loses something critical: its creativity. The very thing that could have helped it escape the cycle of inflation. At the deepest level, rising living costs reveal an uncomfortable truth. Most workers live closer to financial risk than they realize, not because they don't understand saving, but because their income doesn't give them enough room to choose. A small shock, higher rent, higher bills, higher interest rates, can collapse that fragile balance instantly. And this is something traditional economic models often ignore. Risk is not in the average numbers. It's in the real people struggling every single month. What we are seeing now is not just inflation. It is a transition, a new economic cycle, a cycle where inflation is no longer driven by excess consumption, but by structural imbalance, a cycle where interest rates are no longer just a tool, but a growing burden, a cycle where living standards no longer rise naturally over time like they did for previous generations. Today, maintaining your standard of living has become a challenge, because the system is asking people to pay back what was borrowed for years. And unfortunately, workers, the ones who didn't create the crisis, are the ones paying the highest price. They don't print money. They don't control policy. They don't create asset bubbles. But they face the consequences directly: higher expenses, stagnant income, and an uncertain future. This is the paradox of our time. Those with the least power often carry the greatest burden. And when the cost of living becomes a battle, people are no longer just dealing with numbers. They are confronting something deeper: their ability to survive in the system itself. Rising living costs don't just change how much money you spend. They change how you feel about stability, about fairness, about what it even means to work in a world shaped by inflation. Inflation is a quiet force. It doesn't arrive with noise. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small changes, so small that you barely notice them at first. A slightly higher grocery bill, a meal that costs a little more than before, a utility bill that quietly increases. Individually, they seem insignificant, but together, they form a wave strong enough to wear down an entire generation. If rising living costs are the surface, then inflation is what lies beneath. A deeper system of forces, moving slowly, but shaping everything above it. Inflation is not just about prices going up. It's about imbalance between money and production, between consumption and value, between expectations and reality. For decades, modern economies have relied on one strategy: inject more money to sustain growth. When growth slowed, interest rates were lowered. When markets became unstable, stimulus was introduced. When people stopped spending, more money was created to push demand forward. Each time this happened, society borrowed a piece of prosperity from the future. And inflation is when that future comes back to collect. Workers don't experience inflation through theory. They experience it through loss of value. The money they earn today is worth less before they even have the chance to use it. A higher salary no longer guarantees a better life, because what matters is not how much you earn, but what your money can actually buy. And this creates a cruel illusion. Income may increase, but life becomes harder. People work more, but live less. Inflation also changes something deeper: how people think. It creates fear of the future, doubt in the value of money, and slowly, a loss of trust in the system itself. When people don't know how much their money will be worth next month, they stop planning long term. The future is no longer a place for goals. It becomes a source of anxiety. Buying a home, starting a family, saving for retirement. These stop feeling like plans and start feeling like risks. One of the most damaging effects of inflation is how it reshapes consumption. People don't just cut luxury spending. They begin cutting things that once defined a decent quality of life: nutrition, healthcare, education, rest. And this is something numbers don't show. Economic models describe inflation with charts and indexes, but in reality, it changes how people experience their own lives. At a deeper level, inflation reduces the value of time itself. An hour of work no longer holds the same weight as before. Each year, it takes more effort just to maintain the same standard of living, even if you did nothing wrong. That is the cruelty of inflation. It doesn't punish laziness, it punishes everyone, but especially those with the least protection: workers with fixed income, people without assets, those who don't have access to financial tools or investments. While some benefit from rising asset prices, stocks, real estate, others are left watching everything move further out of reach. Inflation, in that sense, reveals the structure of inequality. Those who own assets move ahead. Those who rely only on income fall behind. When money loses value, assets become shelter. And income becomes something fragile, and the impact is never evenly distributed. Lower income groups are hit the hardest because most of their income goes to essentials, the very things that rise the fastest. This traps them in a silent cycle: low income, high expenses, no savings, no investment. And as inflation continues, the gap only widens. But inflation doesn't just affect individuals. It erodes the foundation of society itself. When people feel they are being left behind, they begin to lose trust. In institutions, in businesses, even in their own effort. And when inflation persists, it doesn't just weaken the economy. It weakens belief. Without trust, policies become less effective. Support programs feel slower, less meaningful. And a society that no longer believes in the value of its own currency becomes unstable. At its deepest level, inflation is not just about prices. It is about trust. When people stop believing that life will stabilize, they begin to give up. And when hope disappears, productivity declines, consumption slows, growth weakens, and the economy enters a downward cycle. This is why inflation is so dangerous, not because it destroys everything at once, but because it slowly wears everything down. It doesn't break lives in a day. It erodes them week by week, month by month. It makes people poorer without them fully realizing it, until it's too late. And by the time they do realize, they've already paid the price. In health, in time, in quality of life, and sometimes in relationships. In the end, inflation is a reminder that no system can run forever on cheap money, endless consumption, and constant intervention. At some point, adjustment becomes unavoidable. And when that happens, individuals are forced to adapt, to become more aware, more disciplined, more strategic. But the hardest truth is this: workers are often the ones paying for mistakes they never made. Stagnant income, rising debt, increasing uncertainty. When the cost of living rises and purchasing power falls, the first and heaviest pressure always lands on workers. They are the foundation of the system. They create value. Yet they are often the last to benefit and the first to suffer when the system breaks. This imbalance has always existed, but in times of inflation and instability, it becomes sharper, more visible, more unavoidable. For years, income growth has already been slow. Now, it is being pulled even further away from the reality of living costs, and that gap cannot be closed by effort alone. When basic needs, housing, food, healthcare, transportation, rise faster than income, workers are forced to face a painful truth. The effort they put in no longer matches the life they receive. Income becomes a weak stream trying to resist a powerful current. And in that fight, workers are already behind before it even begins. When income is no longer enough to keep up with life, people turn to something else. Debt, credit cards, consumer loans, installment payments. They become temporary solutions, but also long-term traps. Most people don't borrow to live a luxurious life. They borrow to survive, to pay rent, to cover education, to deal with unexpected medical bills, to prevent their lives from falling one level lower. But borrowing to survive is the fastest path to financial exhaustion, because you are using the future to pay for the present, and that future is becoming more expensive every day. In a high-interest environment, debt becomes pressure, a tightening force around everyday life. Each month, workers don't just repay what they borrowed. They repay interest that keeps rising with policy changes they have no control over. They cannot negotiate with inflation. They cannot negotiate with interest rates. The only thing they can adjust is their own life. So they cut spending, and when there is nothing left to cut, they start cutting into something deeper: their comfort, their time, their sense of stability, and eventually, their belief. The pressure is not just financial, it is psychological. It's the constant mental calculation behind every small expense, the quiet guilt of not being able to provide enough, the feeling of working every day just to keep up. It's watching your salary arrive and disappear within weeks. It's putting in effort without seeing real improvement. And over time, that pressure begins to spread. Relationships become strained. Money becomes a constant source of tension. Parents feel the weight of not being able to give their children what once felt normal. Emotions accumulate quietly. Stress, exhaustion, loss of motivation. And suddenly, it's not just the economy that feels heavy. It's people. In a world where everything is getting more expensive, even peace of mind starts to feel like a luxury. There is a paradox in all of this. Workers are constantly told to try harder, be more productive, learn new skills, push further, as if the problem is simply not enough effort. But the deeper truth is this: no individual effort can fully solve a systemic problem. When productivity increases, but wages do not. When living costs rise faster than economic growth. When competition in the labor market pushes income downward. No amount of personal effort alone can close that gap. Workers are not just struggling. They are playing a game where the rules have changed, and they are expected to keep up without being told. This pressure is not personal. It is structural, a sign of a system being stretched to its limits. A society where the middle class, once the foundation of stability, is slowly being eroded. A society where debt becomes a tool to maintain basic living standards. A society where inflation doesn't just raise prices, it slowly reduces quality of life, time, and hope. And this pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly. A slightly more expensive meal, a slightly higher bill, a slightly smaller amount left at the end of the month. Each piece feels small, but together they form a weight that everyone carries, even if no one talks about it. And the silence is what makes it dangerous, because when pressure remains unseen, it grows from the inside, until one day, it's too much. This era has placed workers in one of the most difficult positions in decades. They have to run faster on a path that is already sloping downward. They have to give more effort for less return. They have to become stronger just to stay in place. And the truth is, not everyone can sustain that. But it is at this exact point, when things feel the heaviest, that understanding becomes essential. Understanding how the system works, understanding where the pressure comes from, understanding that the problem is not entirely you. Because only then can people begin to respond differently, not just to survive, but to rebuild, to rethink money, to rethink strategy, to rethink how they live in a world that is no longer cheap. Because even in a system under pressure, there are still ways to adapt. But before that, we need to understand something deeper. The impact of inflation does not stop at individuals. It reshapes society itself. Rising costs don't just affect your wallet. They affect trust. Behind every expensive bill, behind every exhausting month where income isn't enough, there's a slow erosion of the values that once kept society stable. If the standard of living of an individual is their home, then the standard of living of a society is its foundation of trust. And in an expensive world, that foundation begins to crack. Inequality becomes more visible. Those who own assets benefit as prices rise. Real estate, stocks, commodities. They act as protection against inflation. But those who rely only on income have no shield. They are not losing because they made bad choices. They are losing because of where they stand in the system. And inflation turns small differences into large gaps. But this divide is not only economic, it is psychological. When one group struggles just to survive, while another grows wealth from ownership, a sense of unfairness begins to spread. Not immediately, but quietly. People begin to question the system, question policies, question the meaning of work itself. Because a society only remains stable when most people believe their effort can improve their lives. But when inflation breaks that belief, frustration becomes the norm, and quality of life begins to decline in ways that are hard to measure. People may still afford the basics, food, housing, transportation, but they lose something else. Time to rest, time to enjoy, time to feel human. And when everything becomes more expensive, people don't cut essentials first. They cut joy. A society that loses its sense of joy becomes heavy, more fragile, more vulnerable, more likely to fall into extremes, emotionally and even politically. In times of pressure, burnout doesn't come from a single shock. It comes from accumulation. People don't collapse because of one expensive bill. They collapse because of 12 months of rising bills with no relief. No one breaks down because of one costly meal. They break down because everything around them keeps getting more expensive, except their lives. It is the repetition of small pressures that creates a deeper exhaustion, one that cannot be measured by economic data, but can be felt in everyday life. Rising costs also quietly destroy long-term dreams. Owning a home used to represent stability, but when housing prices rise far beyond income, that dream becomes distant. Starting a family, once a personal decision, now carries financial weight. Education, healthcare, basic care. Young people delay marriage not because they don't want connection, but because they cannot afford to build a life. And when entire generations begin to delay the future, society slowly loses its ability to renew itself. Inflation doesn't just reduce purchasing power, it erodes trust between people. As pressure increases, competition intensifies. Small conflicts grow. Tension rises inside families. Disagreements become sharper across society. One expensive meal won't break a relationship, but hundreds of them, over years, combined with stress and debt, can slowly weaken its foundation. These fractures don't appear as loud breaks. They appear as small cracks. They don't destroy immediately, but they make everything feel heavier. You can see it in the pessimism of young people, in the tension of middle age, in the quiet worry of older generations. You can see it in the face of a worker at a checkout counter, in a driver filling up fuel, in families calculating their monthly expenses, a shared exhaustion, spread evenly, silently, like a thin layer covering everyday life. And when inflation persists, the first thing to disappear is belief in the future. And a society that no longer believes in the future cannot truly grow. People stop investing in themselves, stop building businesses, stop dreaming. They shift from building a future to surviving the present. And when millions of people make that shift at the same time, the economy loses its most powerful force, the willingness to take risks for a better tomorrow. But perhaps the most dangerous part is not inequality, not even the decline in quality of life. It is normalization. When people become used to high costs, used to stress, used to living month by month, used to shrinking their dreams, then what was once abnormal becomes the new normal. And that is when something important is lost, the belief that life can change. But even in this heavy picture, a different truth begins to emerge. When the world becomes harsher, financial knowledge, strategic thinking, and adaptability become the most important tools for survival. Society may change slowly, but individuals can change much faster. And in an era of uncertainty, those who think differently, act differently, and prepare differently become rare. They become the ones who find a way out, not by escaping the system, but by understanding it, and using that understanding to move differently within it. Because in a world that is no longer cheap, survival is no longer enough. You have to adapt. And that leads to a more important question. Not why everything is getting expensive, but how to live, how to stay stable, and how to move forward in a world like this. No one can change the global economy alone. No one can force housing prices down. No one can stop inflation overnight. But everyone can change how they operate. And that change, even if small, is where a different kind of freedom begins. Freedom from reacting blindly to a changing world. The first shift is accepting a difficult truth. Your standard of living is no longer guaranteed. It has to be rebuilt. Through awareness, through discipline, through strategy. Old financial habits no longer work. Spending freely, relying on easy credit, trusting stable income. These belonged to a different era. A new world demands a new version of you. And this is not pessimism. It is clarity. Because if you don't change with the world will change you in ways you don't choose. The first step is rebuilding your financial foundation, not by chasing high returns, but by strengthening stability. Because without stability, there is no growth. A fragile financial life cannot survive inflation. A life controlled by debt cannot move toward the future. True stability is not about having more money. It is about having space. Space to choose. Space to recover. Space to face uncertainty without breaking. That space is what allows people to think long-term in a short-term world. Alongside financial stability comes a shift in mindset. You cannot control the market, but you can control your response to it. When prices rise, some people feel like victims. Others restructure their spending. They prioritize differently. They let go of what no longer fits. When interest rates rise, some people freeze. Others reduce debt, lower risk, and expand their safety margin. This era does not punish poverty. It punishes passivity. One of the most important strategies today is redefining your values. People often spend money to maintain an image, to feel in control, to meet expectations that no longer match reality. But when living costs become a burden, priorities must shift. You stop spending to impress and start spending to strengthen yourself. You stop investing in appearances and start investing in survival and long-term growth. You stop chasing instant satisfaction and start building lasting stability. In a world like this, managing debt is no longer optional. It becomes survival. Debt is not just a number. It is a claim on your future. When interest rates are low, debt can feel flexible. But when rates rise, it tightens. And if it's not controlled, it becomes a force that slowly takes control of you. To stay stable, you need rules. Debt must be understood, limited, used with intention. Because only when debt doesn't control you, you can begin to control your life. But personal finance is not just about money. It is about capability. No one can escape rising living costs if their income stays the same. That's why investing in skills, knowledge, and the ability to create value is no longer optional. It is essential. This is not a slogan. It is a pattern seen in every economic cycle. Those who adapt faster, learn faster, shift faster, are not only the ones who survive. They are the ones who move ahead when everything restructures. In a world where costs rise every year, income cannot remain flat. It must grow. Not out of ambition, but out of necessity. A strong skill keeps you relevant. An additional income stream protects you from inflation. A diversified source of income protects you when one source fails. Smart people don't chase a higher lifestyle, they chase greater freedom. And that freedom comes from the ability to create value in any phase of the economy. But strategy is not only financial, it is also internal. In a prolonged inflationary world, people become more negative, more tired, more disconnected from the meaning of their effort. That's why mental stability matters just as much as financial stability. Because a tired mind cannot make clear decisions. And decisions made in exhaustion rarely lead to the right direction. Calmness, clarity, discipline. These become your most valuable assets in uncertain times. And, in the end, everything begins with one thing: acceptance. The world today is not the same as it was 10 years ago. Costs are higher, competition is harder, income is no longer guaranteed, stability is no longer automatic. But change is not only a threat, it is an invitation to rebuild yourself, your habits, your priorities, your way of living. Those who are willing to rebuild find a path forward. Those who hold on to the past get carried away by the present. In an era where the cost of living keeps rising, the only thing that doesn't lose value is your ability to adapt. Inflation can erode money, but it cannot erode intelligence. Rising costs can create pressure, but they cannot destroy resilience. And the future, no matter how expensive it becomes, still belongs to those who are willing to ask, who do I need to become to survive this world? Looking back at everything, the rising cost of living, the silent force of inflation, the pressure on workers, the cracks within society, and the strategies to adapt, one thing becomes clear. We are living in a transition, a period where old assumptions no longer hold, where stability is no longer guaranteed, but must be built, where effort alone is no longer enough, but must be directed, where survival is no longer passive, but intentional. You may not choose the conditions you live in, but you always choose how you respond to them. And in that response, you rebuild your life. The world will continue to change. Prices may continue to rise. Systems may continue to shift. But even in all that movement, you can still create something stable, something personal, something lasting. Not by avoiding change, but by understanding it. Because in the end, what matters most is not how expensive life becomes, but who you become in response to it. And in a world where everything keeps rising in cost, clarity and adaptability are the only assets that no inflation can ever take away.